Who here has heard of Zerion before, or has used Zerion? OK, we have a decent bunch. So I'll definitely go through the intro and give you all context as well. Great to have you here. Good to be in Berlin. I used to live in Berlin in Kreuzberg like 5 years back. So it's fantastic to be back to a city that's pretty much not changed. It's just the same as it's always been, as degen as ever. So I'm pleased to be back, to say the least. Today I'm going to talk about something that I think I talked about with pretty much every wallet in the space. There's this new layer 2 Cambrian explosion that's happening just across the board. And wallets and portfolio trackers, we pretty much bear the brunt of more data, more chains, more event tokens, right? So I'm going to demystify a little bit on what's a good framework or approach to think about how you sort of scale your platform to be ready for both tracking and integrating a lot of these newer chains. And B, I'm just going to talk a little bit on maybe some of the features, use cases, whatnot that we've been thinking through at Zerion to sort of cope with the upcoming cycle of just new layer 2s and new chains in general. So a little bit of context. I'm also going to go off some captions based on some rap titles. One of my friend Aditi she used to be at Celestia, and now she's working with Capsule. She started this trend, so we're just going to riff off that. She had this really good talk called More Chains, More Problems in EthCC. And our summaries are pretty much going to be similar, so just hang in there. So if you remember DeFi Summer, right? Back then, we just had this huge compound starting out, this whole governance token sort of summer. And pretty much every DeFi protocol suddenly had this need to launch a new governance token or have liquidity farming. So we went from this sort of season of, I remember, right, like in March or February 2020, we just had 4 or 5 DeFi protocols. So it was like the Uniswaps or the compounds or like the, I think it was Aave, and then we had InstaDapp. For us, as a portfolio tracker, Zerion started off initially as a mint or personal capital for Web3. You have all these assets across one chain. There's no multi-chain. You just want to now, instead of having 3 or 4 tabs open, have 1 tab open, connect your wallet, do all these actions, right? Simple. We then went from that to hey, here's this proliferation of exchanges, and then in the next couple of years, a ton of new DApps coming out. So as a product, we iterated and we added a wallet because people wanted to actually now store their funds in Zerion. We sort of added more wallets, so you could now track your ledger. You could even connect your Ledger Nano X to our mobile app to trade on the go, right? Features like this that just made it more easy to cope with this new season of DApps and chains and whatnot. But then now we're at a stage where obviously Web3 has evolved a lot. You have a ton more use cases. You have a ton more liquidity layers, and you have actual features that both developers and users use. Very simple example, right? Like now my ENS, with my ENS and with my identity, you can pretty much track, understand what kind of person I am on chain, what kind of features I usually interact with. Am I more of a DeFi guy, NFT guy? You can see how rich or poor I am. You can pretty much sort of across the board, if I choose to dox myself with my ENS, understand what's going on. But there's a few problems here, right? Like the first being very easy. It's always been the fees. Like for an average consumer across the world, it's always been inaccessible to really make actions beyond a simple free sign transaction, just given the fees that we've had to contend with. And I think more lately, there's been 3 factors that really brought in this big layer 2 season, right? One, we just have a mature development stack. Stacks like OP Stack and now Polygon with their recent one and ZK Stack just makes it a lot easier for any new tool to consider white labeling their own chain. 2, it's also become I think a lot more interesting as a market. We went from DeFi protocols needing, if DeFi protocol needed a new chain, they'd need a whole liquidity layer of tools and other liquidity providers. But now you have social apps, you have gaming apps. They don't really need a whole liquidity layer anymore. So that's also made it a lot easier. And then finally, it's just the fees, like I said earlier. A lot easier to want to get a layer 2 just because of the advantages these offer to you. So now we're in this interesting space where you have rollups, you have validiums, you have every sort of team just fighting it out against each other on how their solution's better than the other. But it's all come out of a necessity of, hey, we need to make DeFi and just Web3 in general more accessible to users, and fees need to go down at the end of the day. And now come into the kind of core problem here, right? For say like a average wallet or like a DApp user, this is really currently how the user journey is, right? Like you might have like a million different assets and a ton of different chains when you want to connect your wallet to a new DApp for the first time. And this is assuming you only have one wallet and not more than one, which I'll get into later. You find out that, hey, here's this new layer 2 chain, whatever, like Ethereum coin or Vitalik coin. You don't have the chain added, and then you click on, you want to add a custom network. Then there's a ton of details that you usually don't care about. And assuming you already have funds on this chain, all right, you read through those details, you add in your RPC URL, and you're done. But assuming you don't, which is, I think, 99% of users when you're trying out new chains or you're, I don't know, farming for an airdrop or whatever, then you sort of realize, you can't transact, you need to bridge assets. This whole process is going to be a 15-minute process of understanding which bridge supports that. If you don't know about Socket or Li-Fi, shout out to them, they make it a little bit easier. But then you connect the wallet, send the bridging transaction, wait, and then finally, hopefully, your transaction is confirmed and you're ready to start, right? This is a big problem, and this is a problem not just for wallets, but it's a problem for anyone trying to solve for user experience across the board. And we've been thinking a little bit about how we want to approach this, but also how we want to collaborate with other wallets in this space to just think about how, I guess, layer 2s and whatever comes after will sort of bring in, more constraints. Ideally, obviously, you want to have, hey, you can connect a wallet in this DApp. In the same screen, you're able to see, while you're connecting the wallet, you just get an automated, confirmation prompt to add this new network. And ideally, also in the same screen, you're able to, your wallet itself offers you, hey, you don't have X assets on this chain. Here's the best offer based on all the bridges that we've, scouted through for you on bridging assets. And because we already know that you don't have these assets, then there you go, whatever it is, ETH, stablecoins, whatnot, you have it on the chain. Still, there is the problem that bridges, I hope, will fix, and there's also a ton of, I think, proposals coming up to make this process a little bit easier, but the waiting period for assets to bridge, I say 15 minutes as a stretch, depending on network congestion, but it's still a problem, and that's something that we can't really fix as of now, but at least the user experience of, not needing to understand all these details on the RPCs and the URLs and all that. I think that's one thing that we realized at first we could solve for, and this is something that we'll be working on in the coming sprint or so. And I think the key use case here is this is user experience that no one's really built as of now, right? So understanding, in the long run, what kind of design language will converge towards, all of that are still very open questions, but I think the whole point of this is to start getting into that, how do you make the user journey easier in this layer 2 world? And the other problem, right? The other problem is more around, hey, so sure, you now understand that, you need assets on this chain. You've bridged a bunch of assets. Maybe you've done some trades. Now you have 10 new assets on this new chain, right? How do you track that you have these assets on this new chain? There's a bunch of different issues here, right? One, if this is a very, I don't know, it's a staked asset on a new liquidity pool in a chain that we don't support at all, we'd probably not even display that, right, as something you track. So I just broke this down into 3 different areas. One, it's the meta information. For NFTs, fortunately, we have providers like Simple Hash that make it easy. They are adding new chains almost on a daily basis. So what we do at Zayon, we just tap into aggregators for that data. So Simple Hash, for example, get every chain added. Then for NFTs, even your pull-ups that you've just collected today, we're one of the only wallets that show the pull-ups on-chain. We show video NFTs, we show music NFTs, any sort of interactive element, right? So there are providers that exist for that, which maybe a lot of wallets don't even utilize yet, right? So that's the first thing. Try to identify what meta information providers exist and use them wisely. I think CoinGecko is another example. In terms of simple token metadata, they are adding as many new chains as possible. But we always see this as something where you've got to have a hybrid approach based on what problem you're trying to solve for. The other, I think the bridging is more interesting. We currently only integrate Socket, but we're planning to integrate Li-Fi, and then there's also the whole cross-chain bridging ecosystem with XLR and whatnot. So that's another area where I think a lot of players just sort of either locked into one bridge and then choosing not to integrate any others. But I think for us, we'll always take this direction of trying to be the aggregator, this meta aggregator. And the final one is a reliable node provider. So I mean, this is a little bit more interesting. What we've now kind of formulated internally is for a lot of new chains, there's this whole long tail of chains that no one really uses, right? How about going about like a lightweight integration for these chains? Like you don't need an archive node unless you want like the whole transaction history for this chain. So why not just integrate it with like an existing node provider in a very lightweight format? And usually chains themselves, if you reach out to them, they're very open to like suggesting to you like a very easy to use node provider, right? So that's kind of like one way to solve the second step of the problem. After someone's bridged their funds, now they have some more assets on this chain. They've been experimenting a little bit, and as a wallet or as like a any sort of DApp that wants to retain users because users need the accuracy of their funds on that platform. That's another sort of way to sort of retain there. And this kind of brings us finally to what we've noticed even in the last cycle. It is really all about the data. Like Xerion's moat, or even a lot of the other like sexy front ends that you use day to day, their moat isn't really sort of hey, like you as a user coming onto the platform every day, making trades, giving them swap fees or whatnot. Everyone's realizing that everything's all about the API, right? Like under the hood, what kind of data have you indexed? Has it been the portfolio history? Has it been, I don't know, like anything across like understanding like user intents and all of that? It's almost a Web 2.5 world now, right? And in that layer, we've sort of like also done a lot of improvements in how we not just, I guess, collect data in a very privacy-centric way, but also in terms of how we optimize for data in a very privacy-centric way. So one example of, I guess, like data is that in wallets, we've all faced this. You have 2 or 3 different wallets, maybe your MetaMasks, your Xerions, and your Phantoms, and you go to a new pop-up. It might not be Wallet Connect. It might be some new Web3 auth, privy, whatnot. And you suddenly see there's 2 MetaMasks on there, or there's 2 Xerions on there. You can't use both interchangeably, right? This is an example where we partnered with the Wallet Connect to release the EIP 6963 proposal. Essentially, now you can have multi-injected wallet discovery in the same tab. So you can connect multiple wallets simultaneously on multiple chains and use wallets without any like pop-ups and annoying modals and all that. So the first learning lesson there was like, hey, like this is a problem. What's the Web 2 approach? Honestly, that sometimes works. Like in this case, you can pause the Xerion extension for a certain new DApp that doesn't accurately support 2 different wallets connected at once, because not a lot of wallets or DApps know about the EIP 6963. And now it remembers your preferences, all stored natively in your browser. And this is a new era where you might have a gaming wallet that you use only for gaming DApps. You might have Xerion for your hot wallet or sort of like your degen use cases. So that's something that we've seen, and we've also now advised a lot of other wallets on in terms of how you can sort of approach this very interoperable user experience. And the second, I guess, just in terms of some of the newer features that we're planning to release as well, like I talked about the multi-injected provider discovery, but we're also releasing a ton of things on safety, security. There's things that I mentioned on being able to add custom RPCs and new chains. So you'll be able to add pretty much any chain already live in our browser extension and our mobile wallet, in a very easy to use format. And all of this while being privacy first, right? So if you've connected a bunch of different wallets, one of the largest concerns that we have coming from users is that, hey, like, won't you be able to dox us out if the IRS comes to you and asks you for like the cross-associated data? We can't do any of that because all of that is stored on your browser locally, and none of that is stored on our backend. But what is stored on our backend is what we now classify as our API. So back in 2020 and 2021, almost every other wallet, portfolio tracker, be it Zapper, be it wallets like MetaMask and whatnot, they would show you asset prices queried directly on their front end from other price sources. What we chose to do back then is to actually build all these price feeds and these sources on our backend and build this robust infrastructure such that if Infura is down, or if like Alchemy is down, or Etherscan is down, we still show you the prices. And a lot of times this happened in 2020 and 2021 during like the whole bull run. These apps would be down maybe for a short period of time, showing you no prices, but Xerion would, right? And over time, that I think initial investment just led to now, us having adapters for almost every DeFi protocol in the space, or us having these like transaction history feeds that now, if you use Coinbase, or if you use Rainbow, or if you use Uniswap, if you go to Uniswap's wallet, if you go to their transaction history, all of that data is now fetched from Zerion. And we sort of now almost have this B2B angle of, hey, like we've built this like robust infrastructure as a REST API and a WebSocket API internally. Teams started coming to us being like, hey, like this is really hard for us to build in-house because we need someone to like, you can't just query this data directly from a node provider. You have to parse a token's full history. You've got to bootstrap, okay, what's sort of like the price at which a person bought this asset, what's the price currently, what's the ROI. We give you all of that in a single line of code. So I think the learning there was, hey, like this new data layer is also a way where we can help sort of solve and build for this layer 2 explosion. So as we go forward, we're starting to collaborate with a lot of chains as well, where chains might be interested in giving grants, saying, hey, like I'm a new chain. I see that Zerion's API is now powering 10 different wallets or dApps in the space. How do we go about integrating? So if you're interested in exploring the API, it's still very much stealth. We haven't done any publicity or marketing on it yet, but it's available now in docs.zerion.io. So very much if you're a dApp developer, if you're a wallet developer, if you want something as simple as a portfolio value and as complex as multi-chain NFTs, like charts and all of that cool stuff, we provide all of them in like a very simple to use REST API. So that's been kind of the culmination of all this research across the data, across how like solve for user experience, and then finally kind of like what we're seeing now with this whole layer 2 explosion. So just to recap, very high level, I think one simplest lesson is to like just collaborate as closely as possible. If you have a BD team, if you have a public relations team, whatnot, like I think being close to teams like OP Stack, or being close to like Polygon, teams that are almost like now gatekeepers of, hey, like I know when base chain is going to come out 1 month from now, and I can help you get in touch with them and understand how to integrate them into your product natively. I think that's the first main lesson. So roll up as a service or layer 2s, like really take them seriously. Very similar, I guess, both technical and empirical analogies to before. Then, yeah, any API that provides comprehensive data, if you even just go to like your node provider right now, if you use QuickNode probably has like their own third-party API aggregator, right? Like there's a ton of APIs that can provide data for whatever need that you want. So I think this is more so like a sort of like positive development from like a couple of years back, even like last market cycle, where you didn't have any API, any documentation really. And people actually hated that, right? Like when Alchemy came out with their sort of super node, people didn't like the fact that, hey, I couldn't just like self-host my own node and now a centralized provider wants to do that for me. But over time, it's just a matter of convenience and price and security, right? The final, I guess, a couple things, yeah, chains and bridges, they really should be abstracted away wherever possible. And when I say abstracted away, I mean this as the end user, right? So you really don't want to know, like you don't need to know, hey, like do I have 100K USDC in this one chain or the other chain, or split across multiple chains. When you use the end product, it just needs to work. And I think we're moving towards that kind of an experience with chains and bridges oftentimes colluding with each other as well. And yeah, finally, the layer 2 explosion, really we'll see more mainstream crypto dApps gaining adoption. And we've had a couple of really cool talks before, having numbers, having estimates and all that on when this is going to happen. But I think it's going to be a matter of like sort of when, not if, more or less. Thank you.
OK. Cheers. Thanks, Avi, for the presentation. So do we have any questions? Nobody?
So how much thanks a lot for the talk, first of all. How much the API costs, this REST API for the data?
Yeah, good question. So we have a free generous development key. Should be up to like 15,000 calls or so per day for free. So that would be almost 500,000 calls in a month. And with that, you can query a ton of, I'd say, like if it's transactions data, you can query like maybe 10,000 wallets or so, like spread over a month. If not, because it's a high-level API, every endpoint has a different price based on how complex it is. So if you take our history or our transactions, those are usually the most complex endpoints. They start at about $50 for 100,000 calls. So like $500 for like 1 million calls. And maybe to give you like, I don't know, a sample, right? Like some of the large wallet customers that we have, they make around 20 million or 30 million calls so per month for 300,000 users. So you can kind of just infer off of that. If you're a starting developer, we also have grants. Just got to reach out to API@xerion.io with your use case, and we can even give you like a full free production key. And for some of the NFTs and like the token data and all that, those are, yeah, even 1 million calls would be, I think, for the NFT data, for example, it's $50 for 1 million calls. So very similar to what Simple Hash or some of the other players offer.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, Abi, I have a question if nobody else has a question. So in this session here today, we spoke a lot about payments, merging the two worlds, and I'm just wondering, how is Xerion looking into that space right now? How does it see changing? Is there a user's demand for solutions like could be Gnosis Pay or Monerium within your wallets?
Yeah, good question. Even I have a couple crypto cards. I don't have Gnosis Pay yet, right? But I think I myself would be a big user of that. And a couple of these cards, I've had to import my Xerion keys to be able to like use them as a debit card, right? So I'd say myself personally definitely would be a user. And we've had a ton of inbound, right? In terms of, I think there's more B2B inbound than user demand though, at least for now, where we stand. Because our users are usually what we'd call Web3 citizens, right? Their users are just using, on average, like 4 chains every day. They have a bunch of dApps. From what we see so far, it's still a market that I think is like something that we'll wait and pause a little bit to see if market demand really grows, just because users prefer to be more on-chain. And there's this other flip side, right? Like if you have off-ramps and if you have debit cards, users might actually even like move away from your wallet to take money out, right? Like there's a ton of different retention-based questions that I can talk to with my PM for a long time, who's super against some of these things as well. But yeah, I think user demand, not so much yet. Maybe some of our US-based users or European users would prefer something like this, but a lot of our degen on-chain users, they haven't really asked us much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Any other question?
So it almost sounded like you started out as sort of an aggregator of APIs like Etherscan and so on, and then you sort of build up this data yourself, and now you're sitting on a bunch of data, probably your own data lake, probably already thinking about data engineering and so on. You mentioned this API, like how do you think about this space evolving? Obviously the graph is very popular and everybody sort of uses it, but there's also some issues with that. Like, how will you make your data usable for developers? Is it just going to be the REST API? Are you thinking about GraphQL? These sort of things.
Yeah, good question. So I think one thing that's hard to understand in the API space, at least in Web3, is like, what API solves for what problem, right? Like the graph, for example, or a lot of these lower level APIs, they don't provide any transaction history that's multi-chain and real time. So what I mean is, GraphQL is a good idea. Say like you're able to submit 100 different wallets. They don't output like, here's the transaction history for every single like transaction that this wallet has done in a single call. What they'd rather do is they have a bunch of like, Graph APIs, Node APIs, and a bunch of other like provider solutions. So for us, I think we're a very niche API, right? All we do is just solve for this transaction history, portfolio, and DeFi or NFT assets. For that, a lot of our, I guess, like roadmap or data engineering roadmap is very much like some providers asking us, hey, like, can I have transaction webhooks? So now, like, whenever a new transaction is done, you can build push notifications just using a webhook built on top of this API. So you don't need to use maybe another push notification provider like EPNS or some of these other platforms, right? So for us, and honestly, our roadmap has been very much feedback driven. How the API started is a year back, Rainbow Wallet just coming to us being like, hey, if we like all this data you've built, can we use this ourselves, right? So we haven't really structured this. I'd say for a graph and whatnot, like, they also have this other challenge of, they usually have a token or they have like a big, whatever, venture-backed business to like, sort of like fall back to. For us, our primary business is still the B2C, like the wallet and like the sort of like user-facing platform, right? So this team that I'm working on with the API, we don't have those pressures of like, hey, we need to be like, I don't know, scaling like 100x or like adding like a whole set of new features. So we're very much focused on, let's try to do what we do best, which is transaction history and some of these wallet native use cases. But in terms of, like the graph, I'm a big fan. Also, I work out of their SF office all the time, the Edge and Node space. So the graph, Alchemy, Infura, Pocket Network, QuickNode, I think they're all in their own battle of, we need more, like there's only about 10 to 20 big customers in the space right now, right? So they're in that battle. We want to try to get like, as many big contracts as possible for a node provider or for like, using our subgraphs. So we aren't really in that. For us, it's very much, if there's a new account abstraction wallet coming up and they need to build this portfolio, they come to us through word of mouth. Yeah, so different market.
Okay, thanks, Abi. We're out of time right now for questions. Thank you again.
Cheers. Thanks.